Welcome to Sci-Fi Quantum Archives. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and explore. No one was prepared for the silence beneath the trench. It began with a map, one marked with errors no one could explain. Earthquakes that should have left scars hadn't. Fault lines in the Pacific Plate that showed no history of strain. Not anomalies, exactly. Absences. Voids where there should have been echoes. A coalition formed quietly, with the kind of funding that doesn't ask for headlines. They called it Project Ophiotoma. Its public face. A geological research mission into the subduction zones of the Western Pacific. The reality. A calculated descent into the deepest rupture on the planet. No one argued against the choice. The Mariana Trench was untouched, unmatched, and increasingly incomprehensible. The crew was assembled in fragments over a year. No ceremony. No press. They boarded from different ports under different flags. A floating base of operations, modified from a retired deep-sea mining platform, was restructured to withstand pressures its engineers admitted they didn't fully model. Every bolt held in tension. Every readout watched twice. The mission brief was simple. Penetrate the oceanic crust at a depth no drill had ever touched. Collect core samples. Measure the heat gradient. Chart unknown fault geometries. Confirm or disprove the magnetic reversals recorded by unmanned submersibles 5 years prior. Those had returned data no one had been able to replicate. The crew worked in near silence the first day. Most had operated in remote zones before, but this felt different. As if every movement pressed against something that resisted, quietly, invisibly, just beyond sense. Day 3. First borehole initiated. The platform trembled as the drill engaged, steady rotation pushing through silt, basalt, descending into darker bands of rock. Expected resistance didn't arrive. Instead, the drill advanced with unnatural consistency. Too smooth. No fracture zones. No acoustic scatter. Just uniform descent. By the end of the first week, the drill had reached depths it shouldn't have cleared for another month. The project geologists submitted a sealed report noting core samples arriving in reverse stratigraphy, lighter material from deeper zones, heavier deposits sitting atop them. Preliminary scans showed magnetic alignments flipped by exactly 180 degrees. The readings weren't dismissed. They were filed. Quietly. With passwords. Tension increased in a way no one acknowledged aloud. The kind that settles in the stomach, not the skin. Data made no sense, but it came clean. No noise, no failure. Even when the instruments disagreed with physics, they did so with precision. There was no chaos in the system. Only dissonance. As the drill passed through 8,000 meters of crust, someone marked the time. 2:14 Greenwich Mean Time. Not for any reason. Just a habit. Someone else noted that seismic sensors on board the vessel had begun registering non-local echoes. Shallow vibrations, originating far below, but arriving ahead of the expected wavefronts. They were quiet, nearly imperceptible, but they were rhythmic. Still, the drill continued. No breakdown. No drag. No collapse of the borehole walls. The rock should have fractured under that pressure. It didn't. At 9,300 meters, the onboard gravimeter dropped by a full decimal, held steady, then normalized without explanation. No one spoke for a long time. The first anomalies came packaged in metal tubes, labeled, logged, and delivered without fanfare. Cylindrical sections of Earth's oldest crust, extracted with surgical precision, placed onto sterile steel trays. At a glance, they resembled every other core retrieved from oceanic subduction zones. Until they didn't. Initial visual inspection noted alignment patterns within the mineral structure, consistent, linear, unnatural in their precision. Thin magnetic grains oriented in parallel, but not with the curvature of Earth's magnetic field. They pointed the opposite way. Every sample. No variation. Reversed polarity from top to bottom. The magnetometer flagged them immediately. Field reversal, sharp and complete. The crew assumed instrumentation error. They recalibrated, ran redundancy tests, switched machines. The readings held. Each core section appeared to have recorded geomagnetic history in reverse, as if the crust had formed during an era that never occurred. The seismology team launched their mapping routines across a grid zone that, by all geological models, should have displayed high activity. Subduction zones generate pressure, pressure generates motion, motion echoes. It's not theoretical, it's law. But the screens returned nothing. No quakes, no vibrations, no reflection of energy. The sensors worked perfectly. They just had nothing to report. The trench responded like a vacuum, absorbing motion, returning silence. No resonance, no shadowing, no interference patterns. Waves entered, but they didn't return. It wasn't a blackout. It was an absence. A removal. He studied the datasets without comment, expression held behind practiced stillness. Hours passed. He asked for printouts. Cross-referenced magnetic reversals with heat flow anomalies. He circled not what was present, but what was missing. Later, in the debrief room, he said one thing. It's not inversion. It's response. This isn't noise. It's reflection. It echoes tectonics, but not in time, something stranger. That sentence was recorded, transcribed, quoted, but never explained. Pressure built not just in the earth, but between people. Geologists and oceanographers argued over how pressure ridges could align backward. One theorist proposed continental drift modeled on mirrored feedback. Another suggested relic magnetization from a prior cycle. Both ideas collapsed under scrutiny. They ran acoustic mapping again. This time at tighter bandwidth, shallower angle. One signal returned. A narrowband anomaly, buried at 12,000 meters. A horizontal layer, perfectly smooth, perfectly even, undetectable by conventional imaging. The sonar array described it only once. On the second pass, it was gone. Or perhaps no longer responsive. They labeled it informally. Mirror strata. No one approved the term. No one disputed it. Later that night, a technician isolated low-frequency harmonics embedded in the original ping data. Not static. Not machine noise. A resonance. A pattern with symmetry, not quite human, not quite geological. As if the ocean had reflected something it could not contain. The drill didn't stop. It should have. At that depth, material should have fractured again, then seized the bit in layers too compressed to yield. Instead, the descent continued. The resistance curve flattened. Geological logic failed. At 12,670 meters, the torque sensors registered a drop, sharp, clean, like the drill had exited the crust entirely. Cuttings stopped coming up. Mud pressure stabilized. Every sign pointed to empty space. But this wasn't a void. Acoustic pulses returned nothing, not even distortion. Energy entered and vanished. The trench had gone silent before, but this was different. Not absorption. Not interference. Just absence. A secondary pulse was fired directly into the borehole. The return signal, delayed, weak, fragmented, showed an interface. Smooth. Horizontal. Material with a surface polish not found in natural formations. Reflective under synthetic sonar, but without refracted signature. No layering, no grain. Non-crystalline. No birefringence under polarized scan. Geologically impossible. The material didn't register on any seismic band. It neither conducted nor resisted sound. It did not reflect pressure or heat. It simply existed, measurable only in its refusal to react. A probe was prepared. No one argued for delay. It was lowered slowly, inch by inch, carried by tension cables reinforced for unknown forces. Cameras powered on. LiDAR swept ahead. Telemetry stabilized. The feed went black twice. Not static. Absence. When the image returned, it didn't resemble any cave or bore chamber. It showed walls, curved, polished, unmarked, but unmistakably artificial in symmetry. Angles that mirrored each other perfectly, too precise for sediment or uplift. The symmetry wasn't just visual. The LiDAR data showed structural repetition, horizontal strata folded backward, not by compression, but by intention. As the probe descended further, it entered a chamber. Not a void, not an excavation, more like a hollow carved into form by something that understood the crust, anticipated stress tolerances, and obeyed none of them. The visual field widened. What looked like fissures ran along the walls, hairline fractures that traced the geometry of Earth's fault lines. Except reversed. Every ridge, trench, fold mapped precisely to known seismic zones across the globe, but flip. South aligned with north. East overlaid west. The overlay was so accurate it passed predictive models used for earthquake forecasting. But there was no movement, no drift, no tremor, not even vibration through the tether. The equipment reported full signal strength. The sensors heard nothing. Inside that substrate, pressure did not build. Heat did not rise. Gravity held, but lightly, as though burden had been lifted from the crust. Silence took a new form, not the absence of sound, but the absence of cause. Every variable stripped of consequence. Every known trigger decoupled from effect. Somewhere beneath that trench, something was holding still. Not in time, not in space, but in refusal. The second probe descended without hesitation. No resistance, no obstruction, no change in pressure readings. Just numbers ticking downward, as if gravity itself had lost interest in consequence. Within 90 meters of entry, the video feed returned a panorama that stopped conversation across the control deck. It showed elevation, clear contours, geological rises, valleys, formations that mimicked terrestrial geography. But nothing aligned with expectation. Every ridge appeared where an ocean trench should be. Every seabed mapped to what should have been a continental shelf. Mountain ranges climbed downward, inverted as if pressed into negative space by a force with a perfect understanding of surface geology. A geological model was loaded, layered against the video transmission. Overlay complete in seconds. Coordinates matched. Fault line to fault line. Subduction zones mirrored with unsettling accuracy. The ring of fire reversed in orientation, its arcs aligned but flipped, northern folds running south, western plates sliding eastward, as though Earth's crust had been peeled and pressed into a reflection with no regard for gravity, no respect for direction. There were no signs of erosion. No sediment displacement. No sediment at all. What appeared to be valleys bore no flood marks. What resembled basins held no trace of former sea. Oceans were present, but wrong. Concave voids, not filled but hollowed, as if the idea of water had been removed from their function. The topography wasn't abstract. It was precise. A mirror, not of appearance, but of position. It wasn't a trick of light. The data from LiDAR confirmed it. Three-dimensional geography constructed from stone and vacuum, identical in formation to Earth's tectonic crust but geometrically reversed. Every measurement confirmed that the surface below mapped the crust above in real coordinates, only inverted. Not a rotated image. A complete, mirrored structure. Arguments broke out across terminals. Was this a simulation? A buried construct? A second planet wrapped beneath the first? None of the theories held weight under examination. No duplication of material. No cloning of isotope signatures. It wasn't replication. It was correspondence. Earth answered by something with the same pattern, flipped across a spatial axis no known force could create. The questions deepened. If this was a chamber, who carved it? If a second layer, why did it not distort gravity? If a relic, what froze it in place? Speculation moved toward origin. It didn't resemble human work. It didn't resemble work at all. There was no sign of excavation, no process marks, no structural inconsistency. The entire formation behaved not as if it had been made, but as if it had always existed in this way, perfectly inverse, perfectly still, perfectly aware of every motion above it. There were no signs of life. No decay. No time. The longer they stared at the transmission, the harder it became to call it subterranean. It wasn't below. It was opposite. They brought the cores up under silence. No chatter over the comms, no congratulatory remarks. Just a sequence of metal casings lowered onto trays that shouldn't have held what they did. Each sample was logged, tagged, and rushed to the onboard lab where geochronology began without pause. What the first scan revealed would be dismissed in any other context. It wasn't the content, it was the order. Oldest formations sat at the top. Basalts predating the Cambrian explosion rested calmly in the outermost shell, layered over Triassic sandstone, which pressed downward into Cenozoic sediment. Further in, trapped near the base, were isotopes associated with the youngest formations on record, barely a few thousand years old. The stratigraphy had flipped its script. The crust was running backwards. Every decay signature confirmed the same sequence. Radiometric dating didn't fail. It obeyed its principles exactly, counting electrons, measuring decay chains, clocking time in half-life. But the order defied logic. It suggested that the further into the layer they reached, the more recent the material became. This wasn't a disturbance. This wasn't uplift or folding. The strata hadn't been overturned or reshuffled. They had formed like this. The structure obeyed gravity, yet assembled against temporal direction. Buried inside one of the middle samples, between mineral layers older than vertebrates, something was found. Not a fossil. Not precisely. More like a formation that mimicked biological growth. Radial symmetry, segmentation, pattern, but wrong in orientation. Its density was highest at the tips, degrading toward the center, as if life, or something mistaken for it, had moved backward through its own anatomy, leaving complexity behind, dissolving into order. There was no sign of decay. No mold. No compression. Only reversal. A fossil unforming, as if evolution had retraced its own architecture, leaving impressions in the opposite direction. No organism on record matched the geometry. No rock formation explained it. They scanned, dissected, reconstructed. Every result whispered the same thing. Whatever this was, it had not grown. It had been undone. The implications refused containment. If geology recorded history, this layer had recorded unhistory. A narrative in reverse. A planetary diary where the pages had been torn out from the end and rewritten backward. Questions emerged that had no shape. Was entropy folding inward? Was time a surface rather than a line? Had motion, at some unreachable point, begun to retreat? A theorist suggested the impossible. A second Earth beneath the first, not as a replica, but as a countermeasure. Not created, but resolved. A solution to a direction the universe could no longer maintain. The theory never reached paper. It didn't need to. The samples spoke without language. They told of motion without progress, of birth without origin. They told of a world that was not younger, but newer. Not designed, but reversed. Not rising, but returning. The last transmission came without warning. No countdown, no warning tone, no abnormal readings. One moment the probe was transmitting positional data, topographic overlays, low-band sonar returns. The next, the stream stopped. Not corrupted. Not jammed. Just gone. Signal loss wasn't new. Oceanic expeditions planned for it. But this was different. The absence didn't behave like a failure. There was no static, no power surge, no tapering. Every indicator flatlined at once, across every channel. The connection didn't break. It ceased. The platform initiated emergency protocols. Retraction failed. Cable tension remained steady for 5 seconds, then dropped to 0. Not snapped. Not cut. Released. 3 minutes passed before they heard it, low, distant, rhythmic. Seismic instruments detected tremors with no identifiable origin, centered below the trench. Small at first. Too small to qualify as a breach. But something in the pattern disrupted attention. The waveforms were perfect. No scatter, no delay, no attenuation. artificial in structure, but lacking any source. On the 4th minute, the sensors registered something no system should be able to report. A seismic echo, registered before the trench move. The timestamps were checked. The logs confirmed them. The instruments had recorded energy release before the event that caused it. Not by seconds. By over a minute. For 72 seconds, the Earth responded to a rupture that hadn't occurred. When the crust finally shifted, it did so without force, plates realigning without resistance, like something below had softened the foundation. Orders were issued. Crew relocated. The recovery bay was sealed. Evacuation initiated. Pressure sensors beneath the platform spiked once, held, dropped sharply. Sonar mapping displayed an opening in the substrate, circular, symmetrical, its edges defined with unnatural precision. The surface around it warped, not breaking apart but folding inward, as if a boundary had ceased to maintain structure. There was no collapse. There was no debris. Just an aperture that hadn't been there before. No light escaped it. No sound. The black box logs reviewed later revealed a disjunction in the feed. Visual frames were intact, but the audio channel played ahead. Half a second. Then 2. Then 5. By the 8th second, the voices of the crew no longer matched their movements. By the 20th, the system's own time signature began to fluctuate. Subsystems fell out of sync. Clocks drifted against each other in stable increment. The further into the breach window, the wider the split became. The final frame recorded before power cut entirely showed the trench from above, now altered. What had once been a black abyss was filled with motionless color, blue, white, soft contours of cloud. Not fog. Not vapor. Sky. Beneath the ocean floor, through the opening that should not have existed, clouds moved in the wrong direction. Not across the sky but under it. Perfectly mirrored. Quiet. Still. There was no reflection. There was only inversion. And it was open. They reconvened inland, far from coasts, far from questions. Invitations were not issued. Attendance was enforced by urgency, not protocol. Physicists, geologists, mathematicians, philosophers, assembled not in consensus but in conflict. What they discussed was not made public. Not immediately. Notes were handwritten, not typed. Transmission lines were cut. The room held people who had never agreed on fundamentals. Now they argued over which impossibility had the least resistance. 3 competing models emerged within days. None were dismissed. Each carried implications no one could accept and none could disprove. The first was called the causal echo theory. It proposed that the mirror layer beneath the trench was not a structure, not a chamber, but a memory. Not symbolic. Physical. A record of Earth's motion impressed into a medium that did not age in the same direction. Not a twin, but a fossil. Not of life, but of sequence. A recitation of planetary stress, stored, replayed, perfectly reversed. A mirror not in sight but in cause. The second, symmetrical seismogenesis, treated the discovery as current, not historical. Not a memory but a mechanism. A counterpart Earth, not distinct but coupled, sharing forces through a boundary where energy moved bidirectionally. The trench, in this reading, was not a wound but a hinge. Tectonic pressures were not isolated. Every shift above had a correlate below. Every quake was not initiated, but resolved. The third model discarded both time and mechanism. It proposed inversion, not metaphorical, not dimensional, but structural. Anti-Earth, they called it, without mythology. A planet-scale symmetry folded into the real Earth through a geometry not accessible to ordinary perception. Not another world. This one. Or rather, the same one, expressed through an opposite. Maps were printed with both surfaces. Seismographs recalibrated. Some matched. Others didn't. Memos circulated unsigned. One described the mirrored clouds below the trench in language stripped of scientific tone. It said they behaved as if shaped by thought. That wasn't reviewed. Recordings of the breach were edited. Redacted. Archived. Files renamed without indexes. The council dissolved without resolution. Weeks later, another memo appeared. It was unsigned, untranslated, mathematical. It contained nothing but a single variable moving backward across a field of decay. No title. No signature. Only a line at the bottom. Silence is not an absence. It is a boundary condition. After that, communication changed. Not between nations, but within disciplines. Seismology reclassified key event. Radiometric anomalies were buried under revisions. Curricula shifted slowly, imperceptibly. No press conferences. No official stance. The silence began in documentation, then in speech. Later, even those who had seen the footage stopped describing it. What remained was a record without a language, and a world now holding more than one direction. The first mirrored quake registered off the coast of Chile. 7.2, shallow depth, no casualties. 43 seconds later, a matching tremor struck beneath the Philippine Sea, identical in magnitude, waveform, and stress angle. No known mechanism could account for the timing. Subduction zones operate on separate timelines, separated by oceans, driven by different plates. The models broke. Again. Patterns emerged. Not random. Not statistical. Predictive. Every major seismic event over the next 8 days produced a second pulse, mirrored in location and form. The intervals shortened. 39 seconds. 24. 12. Geophysicists attempted to trace energy flow, looking for transmission paths across the mantle. There were none. The responses occurred too fast, too cleanly, without distortion. Waves should scatter, reflect, attenuate. These did not. They arrived as if they had always existed, waiting for the surface to catch up. The realization was not spoken aloud. It formed in silence, as separate teams reached the same conclusion. The events weren't caused by surface movement. They were mirrored from below. Not initiated, not triggered, but entangled. What moved beneath did not imitate the crust above, it anticipated it. Revisiting the breach data confirmed the pattern. The mirror layer had cracked before the trench shifted. Not by chance. Not once. Every seismic map laid over the mirror geometry aligned too precisely. Even the microfractures followed known rupture lines, except they formed hours, sometimes days, before their surface counterparts. Prediction models were reversed. Instead of waiting for stress to build above, scientists began measuring the mirror substrate. Each fissure detected was followed by a quake. No variation, no exception. Warnings could now be issued in advance. Not guesses, certainties. But the warnings came with their own burden. Because the time gap began shrinking. By the third week, the mirror ruptures were preceding surface quakes by less than 90 seconds. Not enough time to evacuate cities. Just enough time to know it was coming. Then came the deeper fractures. They appeared in regions with no seismic history. Under Antarctica. Beneath the Greenland shield. The interiors of stable cratons long thought immune to subduction. Each fracture carried a pattern. Each one was cleaner than the last. More refined. As if whatever was below had stopped mimicking. As if it had begun shaping. No model could explain what force could predict fault movement so precisely. No physical law allowed for geology to remember forward. The question was no longer whether the mirror layer was real. The question was whether the Earth's surface still operated independently. Because if it didn't, then tectonics had become an aftereffect. And we were no longer the origin. The order came without discussion. The trench was declared unstable. Risk to marine ecosystems cited. Technical language drafted for the press. Subsea pressure zones. Thermal anomalies. Unrecoverable damage to core equipment. The public read reports of environmental caution. No one questioned closure. At the trench site, operations ceased. Equipment was retracted. The borehole collapsed under controlled charge. A concrete plug followed. Reinforced composite layers sealed the breach with the precision of fear, not protocol. The mirror layer vanished beneath engineered silence. No further probes. No data requests. Access revoked, terminals locked, files rerouted through channels without names. Not erased. Contain. In the final report, a single reflection was left unredacted. It was not a conclusion. It was not a summary. Just a voice, recorded low, without pretense. We found no life there. Only a memory of force, of collapse playing backward. No one replied to the recording. No analysis followed. It was archived without classification. 72 hours after the breach was sealed, a satellite captured a live seismic scan across the Pacific Rim. The waveform should have scattered. It didn't. Every zone, Japan, Alaska, Peru, New Zealand, registered identical tremors. Same strength. Same duration. Same orientation. Each rupture mirrored its counterpart with flawless symmetry. Not delayed. Not echoed. Simultaneous. The Earth moved as one, across hemispheres, across oceans, across fault lines thought to be independent. No geophysical explanation was submitted. Later that evening, the surface sensors picked up another tremor. Low amplitude. Below threshold. Background noise, the kind machines are taught to ignore. It repeated. 12 minutes apart. Same pitch. Same pattern. Identical to a seismic event predicted by no known force. The recording was isolated, compressed, archived. On playback, it reached the speakers a second too early. Not enough to notice, but enough to verify. The tremor had arrived before the ground moved. That was the last file added to the record. No title. Just a waveform, time-stamped, unresolved. The silence that followed was not error. It was instruction. Thank you for watching and sticking with me to the end. Now, if you believe humanity deserves a future among the stars, do subscribe now. Only those who'd abandon Earth to its fate will scroll past.